Yes, thanks again for joining this Planning Safe and Effective Fieldwork panel discussion co-hosted by the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, or PSECCO, and the NSF Ice-Shelf Rumpling Project team. We're going to kick off the event with a few introductions, and we, again, encourage you to introduce yourself and your fieldwork context in the chat while we do our intros so that you all can maybe have a see who's working in similar areas, have an opportunity for additional connection, etc. But hello, I am Mariama Dryack-Valleys. I'm the director of PSECCO, and I will be moderating the panel for today. I'm a fieldwork enthusiast and someone who greatly admires what I've learned of the fieldwork that the panelists will be talking about today. I'm joined by Madison Payne, who is the PSECCO event coordinator, and she will be helping with technical support today. So if you run into any bumps along the way, please direct message Madison, and she can try to help you sort that out. Next, you will see the panelists who are joining us today, and we'll be hearing from them with longer form introductions here in a second, but who you see on the screen here, we're joined by Ali Banwell, who's a member of the Ice-Shelf Rumpling team. We have Amelia Gross, Katria Pacifica Takata Glushkov, Maya Thomas, and Ryan Casado. Ryan is also a member of the Ice-Shelf Rumpling team. So you'll be hearing from 5 panelists, and we'll start off the panel discussion with these brief introductions from our panelists, and they'll give you a bit of a context for their fieldwork. And then we'll jump into our discussion part of the panel. And we've shared this in the information and lead up to this event, but we're working from questions that we received ahead of time. Please, if you have questions, direct message Madison or me, and we can put them into our documents on our end and ask them if time, and if not time, that's also those are questions we can share with the panelists afterward too. But before we get started, we want to remind people that at the core of PSECCO is building welcoming environments for everyone. And so we expect that all attendees will adhere to PSECCO's community guidelines when interfacing with others on the call via the chat, which Madison has posted a link to in the chat if you need to refamiliarize yourself with those guidelines. Many of us here do polar science in locations across the United States and beyond, with research focused on both poles and in high alpine regions across the world. We want to acknowledge that much of that science takes place on the unceded traditional territories and ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples, and that some of the research done in these locations has historical roots in colonialism. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to our understanding of the polar regions, and we want to recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems that Indigenous peoples have and continue to develop in relationship to their lands. Okay, so this is where we now get to hear from our wonderful panelists. So Madison's going to spotlight folks so that you can see them at the top of your screen, hopefully. And we will hear a bit more about the field experiences of our panelists. So if everyone could kick it off by giving a brief introduction to yourself and then summarizing your fieldwork experience and associated context for it, that would be great. We're going to start or go through our panelists alphabetically by first name. So first we'll hear from Ali.
Hi everyone, it is very nice to be here. I'm Ali Banwell. So I'm currently employed in 2 different roles. I'm a research scientist here in Ceres, part of the University of Colorado Boulder, and that's where I'm calling in from today. But I'm also part-time professor at Northumbria University in the UK. So in terms of my research, I mostly focus on the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, and specifically the ice shelves, using a combination of field observations and satellite remote sensing. I am the field PI and the field lead of the NSF Rumpling Project, which Mariama just mentioned a moment ago. And this is a project that Ryan, who's another panelist here, have recently been in the field for in Antarctica. and we have another field season next Antarctic summer. So for this project and many others in the past, most of my expertise has been in GNSS station deployment, automatic weather stations, and time-lapse cameras. This past field season was my 7th deployment to Antarctica, and 6th as field lead of the team. And in previous research trips, I've both worked out of a research station like McMurdo, but also worked out of the deep field from a field camp. And prior to my Antarctic experience, I've also worked on the Greenland ice sheet in the European Alps. And before all of that, I actually did a lot of ice caving in Svalbard and in Himalayan glaciers, which was a bit different. So yeah, thank you. That's a summary of my field work.
Thanks, Ali. Amelia?
Hi everyone, it's good to be here. I am a postdoc at McGill University in Montreal, but most of my fieldwork experience has been during my PhD, where I did 3 full summers and then a few bonus weeks up at Toolik Field Station in Arctic Alaska. So Toolik is about a 9-hour drive north of Fairbanks, so it's fairly remote. And there I co-led field teams of around like 3 to 5 undergrad students, and sometimes PIs came to visit. And this was with another grad student and involved 4 different universities, including the National Park Service as well. And because of kind of COVID quarantine restrictions, our PIs weren't able to come up to Toolik at first. So it was a lot of independence and kind of some added responsibility that we weren't quite expecting when we were originally planning the field seasons. But our work was mostly hydrology and biogeochemistry of Arctic streams, and our research involved a lot of, hiking around, collecting water samples, a lot of helicoptering to collect water samples, hopping out of the helicopters, grabbing those samples, setting up sensors, and things like that. So spending a lot of time around rivers and hiking across the tundra and such. So yeah.
Thanks, Amelia. Katria?
Hi everyone, I'm Katria Takata-Glushkov. I'm originally from California, but now live in Fairbanks as a grad student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute. And my academic background was initially more in geoscience. I did my undergrad in Earth and Oceanographic Science at Bowdoin, and during that time, was really lucky to have a lot of different field experiences every summer that were non-polar, sitting in a little boat in the South Pacific, measuring coral reef bathymetry, and hiking through the Rhodope Mountains in Greece, collecting geologic field samples, and doing some research vessel-based work as well. But throughout that, I really I wanted to learn more from local or indigenous knowledge systems during our work, and I kind of felt a lack of that. So I came up to UAF, where now I am really lucky to go often to Sivokak, St. Lawrence Island. And there I work with Alaska Native Yupik knowledge holders, learning about how sea ice and weather is changing and impacting subsistence opportunity. And yeah, that has been kind of at the intersection of sea ice geophysics and social science and indigenous studies. And this is really my first step toward hopefully a future of more knowledge co-production, engaging with communities, learning side by side on how these systems work. And otherwise, I've supported some other field work for other teams in Utqiagvik and Kotzebue, Alaska, and also done some glacier work in the Wrangell Mountains. And I really feel very connected to Inspiring Girls Expeditions, which is a youth outdoor science education program. And I worked as an on-site coordinator with them. And that's another space where I think I've learned more about, how to establish good team dynamics and, create a safe, welcoming environment when you're in the field. Yeah, thank you to PSECCO, and I'm really looking forward to learning from all the other panelists too.
Thank you. Maya?
I'm a PhD candidate at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, kind of by William and Mary. Um, I'm a little bit different. I'm an oceanographer, specifically a plankton ecologist, and I've done almost all of my field work in the Antarctic, a part of the Palmer Antarctica long-term research study, or the Palmer LTER. So I've been with like a big consortium of people, and I've been in part on my own side, kind of in charge of the zooplankton component of that, at least at Palmer Station. And so I spent 2 seasons, 2 summer seasons at Palmer Station, um, and then another 2 seasons doing oceanographic based work, ship based work on the Western Antarctic Peninsula. So that's kind of my background. But yeah, I got a lot of experience. I've spent over a year in Antarctica. And I got a lot of experience through that. Enough where I taught a fieldwork course actually at William and Mary a couple semesters ago. So it's very important to me to talk about safety because a lot of people go into the field and they don't really understand. And especially being a part of the Palmer LTER, it's like a very established program. It's been going on for 30 years. So it's really good in that regard. But then there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I've been doing it for so long. Sometimes it's hard to introduce yourself to that world. So I love to get the ball rolling, and especially with a lot of the logistics that come about field work that you don't really understand at first. I've talked to a lot of people about how to ease that transition because it tends to be particularly hard, at least from the U.S. side. There's a lot of logistics you have to go through. And so my background is kind of doing a lot of that type of work.
Thank you. Ryan?
Yes, I'm a research scientist at Ceres at the University of Colorado. I also am an assistant research professor at the University of Maine. I sort of exist at the intersection between remote sensing and field work. And I particularly focus on glaciers. I'm a glaciologist by trade. I do a lot with natural hazards as of late. I spent a lot of time in Greenland and Alaska, and then most recently with Allie down in Antarctica, working on the McMurdo Ice Shelf. And a lot of my work, especially in the field, relates to using radars to look at deformation, whether that's ice flow, seismic, landslides. And a lot of them do, particularly with Greenland and Alaska, involve sort of remote field work. So going into the field for a couple of weeks to actually conduct these ground validation measurements against our remote sensing observations. I'm also sort of newly affiliated with JERP. I was a student many years ago, and now I'm helping as part of the University of Maine team as develop a graduate program through there this year that we're launching. And so, I'm kind of in the mix of remote sensing, field-based observations, and I guess both poles at this point. So I just leave it at that.
Sorry, I had to find my cursor. Ryan, would you be able to kick us off with our first question? That question, which we'd love to open to all panelists, is what pre-field planning processes, meetings, or activities do you consider to be essential to do ahead of fieldwork to set you, your team, and folks you might be working with up for success?
Yeah, I think the key is to really try to start, and I say this, and I'm not sure I'm even the best at doing this, but trying to set some pre-field meetings. And so I know working with Ali this last time around, we really tried hard. I think we kind of wanted to do more. We had 2 or 3 meetings beforehand, but that still I think I'd advocate for even more meetings to sort of develop that rapport within the team, sort of establish our expectations and our priorities. And so I think meeting early and frequently prior to the field season is really important. Having said that, this past field season was in McMurdo, and so we were able to we had to go through New Zealand, which meant we had a lot of downtime in New Zealand. And so we did try to capitalize on some of that downtime while we're waiting for the transport to McMurdo. And things we did, like we developed our code of conduct while we were there, which was really good. That was really important. I think we also try to have things like dinners together at night, sort of having that community development, and even taking a day or so just to walk away from work and just we went to go see the sights and did a lot of the tourist things, go to some local beaches and cliffs, just sort of check out and establish that bonding. And I think that was sort of an important part of reminding everybody that we're human, that we're all coming from different backgrounds, just getting used to how we're all going to be working and living with each other over the next, for us, it was the next couple months. And so I think, yeah, establishing those boundaries, getting communication going, and establishing that rapport as soon as you can, sort of several months prior to going into the field, are really sort of important.
Thanks. Yeah, Maya, go ahead. And if anyone else wants to speak to it, you can use the raised hand function.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think like those pre-meetings are really important. And I think it's important to emphasize that like you're not just talking about the science, you're not just talking about like what you plan to do there. Although I think that's very important to like emphasize the hey, this is why we're going here. Let's everyone get on the same page of like why we're here, what our like main goal is. But also for like the logistics. I think the thing I missed the first time when I went down. I had to really ask around for like a packing list. I was like, what am I supposed to bring down here? And what? How do I, do all these medical forms? And those were in the big meetings we had were not about that. They're about like other things. But I think having smaller meetings with like maybe your like specific team and being like, hey, this is the doctor I see. This is all the forms I have. This is what I like, what I bring, just like personally, so I can be comfortable. I tend to really like the more like personalized meetings like that.
Thanks, Allie. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
am I muted? Yeah.
You're all
I
good.
somehow managed to click the wrong button and a like strange avatar came up with bunny ears. I almost ended up with bunny ears, but I didn't. Apologies. Yes, I totally agree with both what Ryan said about yeah, having pre deployment meetings, trying to do some sort of team building exercises, whether that be days out together, hikes, or whatever. Yeah, and also packing lists, Maya, that's a really good point. I also wanted to add that in terms of the pre-field work meetings, I think it's important to discuss really what the field team's expectations of one another, particularly, for example, in terms of leadership roles. So I think one thing that can really help a field team is giving everyone in that field team really clear and distinctive roles that they are in charge of. That makes everyone feel like they're an important component of that team and they are contributing, however small it might be. It's good for just everyone to have that kind of leadership role. And then once those people have those key roles, it's important that they get whatever training is required such that they can succeed in the science that they're trying to achieve. And then for the rest of the team, I think it's important to obviously respect the person who's trying to lead the science. And that it can be kind of, it can mean that some other team members kind of might step aside and like give that, I think it's important to give that person space to do whatever they need to do to lead that particular science objective. So yeah, that's all to say. I think it's good to have those discussions beforehand, as well as continuing in the field.
Thanks, Sally. Go ahead, Katria.
Yeah, going off of what everyone has said, I think kind of answering the basic questions ahead of time so you can answer the more meaningful ones while you're actually in the field. I think this goes both for like testing out your equipment you're deploying in a controlled environment ahead of time. But it also goes for if you are doing any sort of community engagement, even whether you're like the premise of your project is based on community engagement or whether you have, you're addressing basic science questions. I think like doing your homework ahead of time in terms of understanding not only the specific discipline you're working in that location, but also kind of the broader context of environmental history there and cultural history there, even if it's, you know, totally in a remote place, separate from community hubs. I think there's always more we can learn as outside geoscientists, you know, about a place and how people are tied to those places. And, you know, what that can look like is, it's not necessarily about reading papers. It's like finding the local radio stations or newspapers, going on Facebook. In Alaska, Facebook's a really big thing where news is shared between communities. And so there's this, like, you know, it's not the literature review. It's more than that, I think. And then if you do engage with communities also as part of your work, then, you know, rather than asking questions that you could see in a Google ask, you can really engage with deeper level things. And I think that's where like real knowledge exchange can happen in a meaningful way. What else? If you're doing community engaged work also ahead of time, even if it's your first trip, you know, hopefully before you're going to a community, you've made some connections already. And like with the tribal council and whoever you know there, I think it's always good beforehand to reach out and ask, you know, I'm going to be here. Hopefully they've invited you, but at that point you can say, oh, is there anything I can bring? And I've brought anything from like a suitcase full of fresh fruit I always bring, but also people will ask for like, oh, I need a razor and it's hard to get this in my community, or like all sorts of things. And yeah, being able to show that you're not just a scientist coming to do work, but also a human, you know, connecting with people, I think is helpful. And then lastly, just like some things that I always forget to bring and or I used to always forget to bring and always make sure I bring now is if you're working, you know, in the wintertime, bring vitamin D and anti-fog spray for glasses, an extra pair of glasses. Have your field notebook with you all the time. And multiple neck gaiters, like they'll all get wet and soggy, so you want to be able to switch them out, and multiple pairs of boots. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks, Katria. I think your note on doing homework ahead of time and being connected to what's going on locally, like for example, radio station, is a really good recommendation also for like timing field work or knowing when is not the time to come. For example, if you're not paying attention to the news, something like the huge storm that happened last year, Typhoon Halong, would be potentially something you'd like not have context for. And obviously that's not a time to do research if you haven't been paying attention. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Amelia, did you want to speak to this question?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like everyone covered everything really well. I guess I would also say like maybe besides packing list, making sure to like, especially with new people, that they know kind of what the living situation is going to be like, what the food situation is going to be like, what the shower situation is going to be like. Things like that can be things that when you haven't been to a place before, they can make you kind of feel a little anxious about it. And I think especially with people coming to the field for the first time, just knowing that can be super helpful, or checking in with the people who are going to be there for the first time, seeing what they're nervous about so that you're able to kind of like help with some of those concerns so that people can go into the field season with like a positive attitude and not be, I mean, everyone's going to be nervous, but you don't want people to be too like scared of what's to come. You want everyone to come in with a good attitude. So.
Yeah, I love that expectation setting exercise. Go ahead, Katria.
Oh, you also just reminded me of another thing. I think, you know, connecting or learning about what other researchers have done there that aren't necessarily connected to your work itself. Just to, like Amelia was saying, be able to learn from people who have been to that place is really helpful. for yourself. And then also if it is connected to a community, then making sure that you kind of coordinating logistics. So if you're both have overlap, some sort of overlapping, instrument to deploy, maybe you can coordinate that and cut down on costs, and also reduce research fatigue on the community. Or on the other hand, just understanding kind of what is the history of research in that specific place, so that you understand like not only your own positionality coming in, but what sorts of like preconceptions people might have about researchers, given that we're in like this field that does have a kind of colonial history to it. So yeah, helpful all around.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm going to move us on to our next question, which is connected to a resource that some people might be familiar with. The Advancing Field Safety course is this massive open online course that helps people walk through like things that they should think about ahead of going to fieldwork. And as noted in that course, establishing clear communication structures in the field can be really critical to navigating unexpected challenges that arise, be it within the team, with folks outside of the team, many different dimensions. So we're wondering if you can speak to the question of what are some of the structures that you've established with your team or others that you're working with that have been helpful and might be useful to others who are planning for fieldwork. Allie, would you be able to kick us off for this one? We'll post the latter part of that question, yeah, in the chat.
Sorry, Mariam, the wording of the question is just slightly different to what I was thinking it would be. Apologies.
What structures have you established with your team or others that have been helpful?
Yeah, so I guess one of the key things, or one of the most important things to me, is developing clear communication structures. Yeah, and once you develop those structures, to actually follow those structures through when times get tough and stressful in the field. Honestly, to me, that's one of the hardest things to do well during a field campaign. And yeah, at least personally. And it's something I've really tried to work hard on in the past couple of field seasons. So, of course, if conflict is encountered within a field team, it's much better to talk about it sooner rather than later, before those issues may then escalate. But it's obviously, if conflict does arise, no one really wants to talk about it. So I think it's helpful to, early on in the field work, maybe when developing a code of conduct within the team, to actually like plan specific time and slots of when you plan to talk about, or just generally debrief, generally meet to talk about how the field work is going. I think that's very important. So we plan for this recent season to try and talk both at the beginning of each day and at the end of each day. Honestly, we were pretty good at the beginning of each day, actually meeting, partly because we kind of had to plan what science we were doing. But we all admitted afterwards we were not so great at having the end of day debrief. And that's partly because we're all kind of getting back late. We want to all make dinner. We all wanted a shower. We were at McMurdo, so we had showers, which was nice. And yeah, often these kind of post fieldwork debriefs just didn't really happen. I think next year I will suggest, or I will suggest that we talk about like planning specific times on other days, maybe on days when we know we're not going into the fields, when we sit down and talk about how the fieldwork is going. I think that would be helpful. And then the other thing within the communication structure is to ensure that everyone knows that they have veto power on anything, whether it's something to do with safety, whether it's something to do with health, how they're feeling that day. Like if anyone doesn't feel happy with anything, they should speak up, and everyone should respect that and stop and talk about whatever it may be. So yeah, that's just a few thoughts that I have.
Thanks, Allie. Maya, would you be willing to speak to this one next?
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a different perspective because I was kind of like at the bottom looking up and being like, oh, I think everything's fine up there. um, uh, because I very much knew I was probably one of the bottom of just because I was, a grad student and I was one of the students doing the work. I wasn't really in charge a lot of stuff at the beginning, at least. Um, but to me, it kind of seemed like we kind of modeled, we were on boats and their boats were kind of run by like US Navy, US Coast Guard. So we kind of mirrored that, where it was a very like tiered structure system, captain on top, every like the mates and then the crew. And I think that system and like mirroring that system gave very clear guidelines of like who's in charge, who to talk to in case of like anything happens in case of emergency. And like being I had like a PI I could talk to, or I had a lab manager I could talk to. And if I couldn't talk to them, I could talk to the chief scientist on the boat. And if not, I could talk to one of the crew or the captain. And so at least for me, that was pretty clear. But I think in like different scenarios, especially where it kind of got a little fuzzier, where like, oh, actually, I am in charge of this thing, and maybe there's someone who should be working with me on that, or we're working in between labs or something. I think that's where it gets a little fuzzy. And yeah, it's really important to establish like, okay, who's in charge of what part of this, and how do we like all become happy in that. I think, yeah, just having constant communication. Something we did well, I think, at Palmer Station was every day we would go out on boats, the like small boats, and get our work done. And before every time we went out, we did this thing called GAR. I think it stands for green, amber, red. And it's kind of like a risk assessment thing to do at the beginning of every time before you go out anytime, where you like establish, I think it's from like the US Coast Guard or something, and it kind of establishes what is the scenario you're going out to, where like what are the weather conditions like, how's everyone feeling, how's everyone um, is there anything with what we are doing that could be hard or difficult, and kind of just you get everyone together, everyone had to be together, everyone had to sign off on this and just verbally say aloud like how establishing how the day plan is and how that's going to go, and if it's any different than usual, and even when it's like a very typical day, just knowing the inherent risks of being in like a polar environment, or you start getting like, especially mid-season, you start to get like really comfortable. You're like, oh, I've done this like 1,000 times, it's fine. But kind of remembering that like you are in a very like variable environment that changes really fast, that could become very dangerous. So like having constant daily communication and updates on like what's going on, what the plan um, is really important to stop like making sure everyone's on the same page and everyone like has like an idea in mind on how things should go, and if things get out of line, how to fix that or stop, and like, okay, let's work this out so nothing bad happens. I hope that answered that.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. I appreciate you highlighting that you had structure, but you also, like in terms of who reported to who, I know this was earlier on in what you said, but that you also had other people you could talk to outside of the established structure, which can be really helpful. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in here? Go ahead, Katria.
Just real quick, I think, because we operate, well, because research, or academia specifically, has these power structures, I think honestly, I can see what people are saying about having clear roles as being important, but I also think I've been super lucky in most cases to have uh, a PI who is like very clearly working to loosen the power structure to enable me as someone who's lower on the structure to actually feel comfortable to actually say it, like stop if I am no longer comfortable in a situation. And I think as early career researchers, we navigate this difficult space sometimes because sometimes we're the only one in the field, or we're the one who's doing the main like work, but we also are not. We're like, for example, I'm the one who interacts with community members when they have a question about our larger project. But I'm also not in a power position to be able to fully steer the boat. And I think that is sometimes a difficult space to navigate. And it helps a lot to have a PI who very explicitly acknowledges the power structure and also like shows a value for emotional intelligence. Particularly in the Girls on Ice setting, this is where I've seen it work really well, where, in those daily debriefs and check-ins, it's not just, I think those debriefs are so important because it's like where you figure out what your lessons learned are, but it also, if you truly feel safe to share how you're actually doing, I think that can really make, especially people who are new to being in the fields, a lot more comfortable.
Thanks so much, Katria. Amelia, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think our group had a pretty unique experience in that it was just me and another grad student, and then a lot of undergrads. We had PIs, but they weren't there. So during our first year, we kind of didn't have a structured report to our PIs every week or anything like that. And that kind of made it difficult, like just not having that scheduled like check-in with them to like talk about problems that were happening or anything like that. So I think kind of establishing that, especially if your PIs are like somewhere far away, is really helpful. Also, one thing that me and the other grad student made an effort to do is kind of check in with our undergrads every week or so, just kind of individually, whenever we would just happen to be like hiking across the tundra with one of them, just check in on their mental health more and be like, how are you feeling? Like, do you need a break? Like, you've been working really hard, and just kind of trying to be really cognizant of how people were feeling, because I think that's kind of the most important thing about fieldwork, the make or break part, is if people are still having like a positive outlook on how things are going. So I think, yeah, that just making sure there's a structured check-in with your PIs, but also kind of just being very aware of if people are like, or if you notice any like changes in how people are feeling towards the project or towards other people on the team and things like that.
I really appreciate you bringing up mental health and the need for breaks and making space for that also within fieldwork, when we're often, there's like a lot of time pressure often associated with these windows we have, but taking care of treating people better than data is a phrase I've heard before, is a really important aspect too. Ryan, did you want to jump in here?
I think most everybody covered a lot of that. So I had some comments for the next, I think, some of the other points. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Okay, well, segueing on to our next question, we all know that a necessary part of fieldwork is adaptability. I guess we just had an example of that in potentially taking rest if you need it. Can you please share examples of strategies that you all employ ahead of or in the field to adapt when plans might need to pivot due to unforeseen challenges? Some examples of that might be weather, human factors, etc. Amelia, would you be able to kick us off with that question?
Yeah, I am a big proponent of like, if you can't do what you set out to do that day, pivot and do something different but still productive. I think that's super helpful with keeping that positive attitude in the field. So often we do a lot of helicopter work. So when it's foggy out, we can't take the helicopter anywhere. So we would pivot and drive somewhere to check on our sensors or something like that. So what really helped with that for us was kind of before the field season even starts, making your list of things that you want to do and like approximate times you want to do that. We're out there for 4 months, so we have a lot to do and a lot of time to do it, which is nice, but we still have kind of set times when things are supposed to be happening. So at the beginning of each week, I would kind of come up with a list of like, okay, these are the things we need to get done this week. And then based on the weather, we would kind of pick and choose which of those we were going to do each day and kind of discuss that the night before or that morning at breakfast, what the exact plan was going to be for that day. And I think that helped a lot with making sure we weren't just kind of, sitting and waiting for things to happen. Because I think if that's the case, then your morale can start to get a little lower. You're feeling like you're not like getting much done, and that can be, yeah, really disappointing. So I think, yeah, pivoting, knowing other things that you can get done, and being able to still do something productive is really helpful.
Thanks. Katria, would you be up for speaking to this one too?
Yeah, I think so. Well, first of all, I filled in a lot of wiggle room. I honestly, I have a plan and maybe a plan B, and then the day of, who knows what will actually happen. So, and I've found that this is, well, yeah, sometimes it's like physical factors, and often it's social factors. Someone shows up to come talk to you when you needed to go run to meet with this other person, and the day gets away. And so but for me, one of my primary goals is relationship building when I'm doing community work. And so kind of balancing, yeah, the relationship building with other objectives that are, tie into it, but are benchmarks that you might need to meet. I really have like a plan B, but also expect nothing to go as planned. And as far as what that means, like if you think that you need 2 weeks to, achieve all your objectives, give yourself 3, because who knows what the weather will do. And yeah, there's just so many things that end up changing. And I think, especially if you're working in a community, you don't want to seem like you're in a rush to leave. And like what Mariama was saying, so often, like when you have a high stress, high pressure environment, which you often do when we're in a community or when we're in the field, that's when like conflict can arise, when people are less kind to one another, both within a team and like with other community members you might be interacting with, and you really want to avoid that. So having that wiggle room to, so everyone feels more comfortable. I also think, relationship building with community members is really important, not just because it makes us do better science, but also in terms of, upholding Indigenous sovereignty. But in addition to that, I think it really keeps you safe. We talked about having good team dynamics and good relationships within your team, but also I think in my experience, once I had a lot of connections within Sivokak, and friendships, and I really felt like people were looking out for me when I was alone, and I felt really safe in that way. Whereas earlier on, before I'd had stronger relationships, I don't think I was quite ready yet to be alone. And yeah, so I think it's just like an added bonus. Likewise, on the other side, we as outside researchers will do less unintended harm if we truly have relationships with not only our community research partners, but also community members like throughout the place that you're working in. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Does anyone else want to? Yeah, Allie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said. I think flexibility in a field season is key, and to try and have the kind of flexibility mindset at the beginning is important. If you go in there with set objectives for what you want to do each day, you're bound to be disappointed, and that just doesn't set up the field season to go well. One thing that we discussed following this past field season is how in future seasons we should try harder to train everyone up, not just on their kind of primary bit of science equipment, but also on a secondary bit of science equipment, such that we can have more flexibility on a day-to-day basis, depending on how what the weather's doing and who else is available, whether we, for instance, have mountaineer support or whatever. Just yeah, to give the field team more flexibility to pivot without any implications for the science. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like when it comes to, you talked about weather and these sort of things that, we all know in the field work that nothing goes according to plan, right? You plan for your best and you have to sort of expect the worst. And so when it comes to weather or whatever, you have to re-strategize, right? And so when you're making new priorities, I think it's really important to get the group buy-in. So having all your entire field team there is really important during that. So when you're working through the discussions to reprioritize what you're going to do for the day or for the week or what have you, to have everyone there. And if for some reason, like if you have a really large team and everyone can't be there, I think it's really important to have representatives from each sort of subgroup or whatever, if you've got a radar person and a chemistry, I don't know, whatever those different field objectives are, somebody from that team needs to come together and make sure that they're present. Rather, the PI should make sure that all the representatives are there. And if somebody is missing, the first priority after that meeting should be to communicate whatever decision was made to the rest of the team members that weren't there, just to make sure that there can be some of those power differentials sort of surface if that doesn't come into play. And so, in an ideal world, everyone will be there. But if not, you need to make sure as a PI or a COI that information gets disseminated as soon as possible to the rest of the team so that any other issues that may come up can be sort of squashed before they become a bigger issue. Um, I will also say that you should sort of when you're reprioritizing things, to sort of consider like the people's comfort levels, right? Fatigue sets in, sleep patterns will set in, stress levels will set in. So make sure that those sort of considerations come in when you're making these new plans. Maybe somebody wasn't prepared to go into the field that day, was going to take a day off, all of a sudden has to go in for some whatever reason. Make sure that they're comfortable doing that. Having daily wellness checks is sort of important. Um, yeah, I think those are like kind of the two key points. It's just making sure that everyone's still on board when you're changing those priorities and that you're communicating those clearly with everyone.
Really appreciate you highlighting power dynamics, Ryan. I think that's especially relevant with the unique positionality that some early career researchers find themselves in with reference to field teams and field priorities. Yeah, Maya, I saw you raised your hand. Did you want to chip in as well?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of what Allison said. I really liked, teaching people more than just their like one primary like job. I think that is like a really important point because I've certainly done it. I've seen a lot of people like get really comfortable with like, oh, this is the job I'll like. If it is something that it can be flexible, be like, like I could try something else, but this is the one I'm really comfortable with. This is the one I like the best. This is the job I'll keep on doing. But if anything happens to that one person or that one piece of equipment, it kind of all going out of whack. So constantly kind of, if at all possible, constantly like changing it up and making sure everyone's comfortable at each different part of whatever you're doing. So you don't you if something does happen with equipment or a person is out for a day, it's not like a complete bust. And two, so well, you can also learn more about like more encompassing of what you're doing. And then also there's not as much like pressure on like one person to make sure that they're good enough for, to do this one job because I'm the only person who's able to do it. Like knowing that like, oh, I can actually like swap you in with another person and we can still get it done. You don't have to do it if you're like not feeling that good or for some reason you have some other commitment, like okay, perfect, I can actually do this with someone else. Knowing that there's just that additional adaptability, flexibility is always nice to make it like comfortable.
Thanks so much, Maya. Yeah, redundancy, so critical to making sure everyone's cared for as you're in the field. Um, Great. Well, moving on, or before we move on, I want to note we're a little ahead of time. So if folks have any questions and want to direct message me, as we're hearing from panelists on the upcoming questions we have, that would be great. Send them my way, and I'll do my best to ask them. So our next question is about risk and mitigations with reference to grant applications. So this was one of the pre-submitted questions by someone attending the panel. And their question is, how do you assess risks and mitigations associated with Arctic fieldwork? Or I think we can, extrapolate this to polar fieldwork in grant applications. Is anyone keen to speak to that? Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, we just submitted a proposal last September, and it was for fieldwork in the Arctic, and it was just recently accepted, actually. And one of the things that we really focused on was, even though we have a large team, I think there was 9 investigators on this team. It's a rather large team. Um, Almost all of them with some sort of remote field experience in the Arctic. We still incorporated having field safety personnel and made that part of the budget, which actually was kind of, we questioned whether we should do that given the, all the changes that are going on and current budget constraints. But we really pushed that through, and it was accepted by the fund agency. And so we do have budgeted money in there to pick somebody with certification to help us with the field safety aspect, as far as actually keeping us safe when we're doing the groundwork. So that's sort of the first thing, is sort of like from a mountaineering standpoint, is actually bringing in a mountaineer with us when we don't have a logistical company that we could work with. And then for 2 is sort of building contingency. So making sure that, and another grant that I was just in a meeting with this morning, talking about how many tents do we have and sort of extras and these sort of things. And so we have this many tents, worst case scenario, if a couple get destroyed, we'll have so many in reserve or something like that. So building contingency, building reserve as best as you can in this sort of difficult funding environment is really important. And so just finding a way to get creative so you could use those resources for other things if you need to, and dual use applications, I think, is really important when you're building that contingency. But just being able to communicate that in your field plan in the proposal itself is really important too. I think that's the other key part of it. So it's one thing to include it in your budget, but actually explaining that concisely, but conveying the need to include that and why it's important for your team, I think goes a long way, particularly with the program managers and the peer reviewers.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I'm going to jump in here and also just highlight that there was something released not too many years ago, but it's changed a little bit. Now it's called the Safe and Harassment-Free Fieldwork Plans. I'm not sure what funding context this person was asking the question within, but this is a link to that, wherein some geoscience and biology solicitations, certainly many polar ones, now require a plan for harassment-free fieldwork. And I think that it's worth asking people as you're applying for funding, like PIs who have previously submitted within the past year, to see like what they've submitted in terms of a plan. Also reach out to your institution, because all institutions have started thinking about like how they can support PIs with this plan. But then I'm gonna do a shameless plug again for the Advancing Field Safety Program was designed specifically to help people create good harassment-free work plans, and not just create a plan, but like help people practice bystander intervention and keeping spaces safe in terms of interpersonal dynamics. So if you're not familiar, again, with the Advancing Field Safety Program, I recommend taking a look at that, because it was built to kind of in direct answer to the question. Allie, did you have anything you wanted to add to this one too?
Not hugely, honestly. From the other than what's already been said, which have all been great points. In terms of objective risks in the field area, so yeah, Ryan touched on this, but I guess in terms of how to word it in your proposal that you, for instance, need a mountaineer and you're budgeting for a mountaineer, it could be helpful to speak to other field teams who've worked in the area, so that you have a better understanding of what the risks actually are for the area that you can refer to. Yeah, and I totally agree. Field Safe is a great program to help with the interpersonal dynamics side of the risk.
Thanks. Okay, let's move on to our next question and encourage folks to keep sending me questions in the chat. What do you perceive to be the single most important part of ensuring a safe and effective field campaign? I designed this question slightly to give you all freedom to talk about anything else that might not have been captured by any of these other questions. I can pick someone at random unless anyone's super keen to kick us off. Go ahead, Allie.
I mean, I've already said this before, but just to highlight it again, I think developing the clear communication structures is the most important thing that can be done to enable a field season to go successfully. And yeah, in my experience, that's much harder than getting the science done or planning the science. It's particularly as PI or field lead, it's a much harder component of the field season to do well. I mean, anyone can have a go at it, but to actually do it well and follow that plan structure through is very tricky. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and so along the same lines, like I totally agree with what Ali just said, is maintaining that clear communication, but then having that open communication as well as sort of a tangential to what Ali was saying, is sort of make sure that you're approachable for like anybody, for a PI, for a postdoc that's working with a grad student, wherever there's a power differential, make sure that you're approachable, break down those barriers, and allow a welcoming environment. I think that's really, really important to help sort of foster that. You want people to feel safe in that environment. There are already all of these other variables that they're going to feel unsafe because maybe they've never been there before, or it's really cold, or there's a tremendous storm that's coming in. There's any number of environmental variables, excuse me, they're going to factor into people's discomfort. And so things that you can control are really important to do that. And so maintaining those open lines of communication to make sure everyone's comfortable in that environment as best they can, I think is really important.
Thank you. Amelia, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ryan said, and kind of going off of that, as the person like in charge of the field team, you're kind of setting the tone for how a lot of people are going to feel about the field season. So you kind of need to make sure you have a positive attitude towards the work you're doing, and yeah, allow for that kind of camaraderie between you and the other people on the team. I think, yeah, having that positive attitude is kind of, in my opinion, one of the most important things to have an effective field season, because you can just get so much more done when you're feeling good about your work. And yeah, I would say never underestimate, like, just when you're out hiking, like, oh, playing a game, playing I Spy, something like that, just like little things like that can always help, like, increase morale, just having a little fun and not taking everything too seriously, even though a priority is obviously like doing good science, but also, yeah, having that good attitude.
Thanks, Amelia. Maya, would you mind speaking to this next?
Yeah, I would agree. I think communication is the priority. But I would also emphasize something I emphasized in my class that I taught is planning. Like you said, a lot of planning does not actually work out. But when you're, at least in Antarctica, was so remote, you had to plan everything months in advance. And I think so doing that and being before it's due, like getting everything ready, knowing what you want to do, knowing what it takes to do these experiments or whatever, and having backups on backups, because if you're like in a position where if something breaks, which it inevitably will, like are you going to be able to fix it, or are you just like, are you like, what do you do when that happens? So I definitely like have put an emphasis on like making sure we're going there with a plan, and here it is, and here it is for everyone to follow, and everyone get on the same page, and this is what I want. And this is how I'm gonna make this happen because I've been planning this for months and months and months in advance.
Yeah, I appreciate that pre-planning, Maya, also enables you to maybe be less stressed out when faced with a pivot, maybe. I don't
You
know if
can
that.
try your best, but
Yeah.
it is nice to be like, oh, maybe I didn't plan for this to happen, but I do have a backup. So it's, it is like, okay, this was stressful, this was horrible, but I know how we can, I know this is not the end of everything.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Katria, did you want to share your thoughts regarding what's the most important part of a field campaign that's safe and effective?
I feel like I threw out so many things earlier, and it's hard to identify a single one, but I guess just kind of reiterating relationship building, like ideally from before you even go to the field. Yeah, I'm starting to think about what this other person asked in the chat. So yeah.
Uh, Fair. Maybe that's a good segue. I've gotten a couple direct message questions, but we also have this one in the chat. Maybe we can segue to that, and you don't have to be put on the spot, Katria, for it. But if you have thoughts, Justin asked for ice floor, ice sheet field work. What are some of the more nitty-gritty lessons learned on items to bring, things to account for, safety lessons learned, etc.?
I can start us off on this. I mean, I assume everyone here brings like a sat phone and an inReach out. Definitely do that. I think, okay, some of these hopefully will never matter. But just out of an abundance of caution, I used to have really heavy gear, and I'd heard enough stories of people having to jump across the ice when the ice breaks out that I got lighter, like physically lighter gear that's still warm, but not going to weigh like 50 pounds. Hopefully, I will never need to jump across an ice floe, but it does kind of give me peace of mind. I also bring a PFD with me every time. Most of the time, you don't ever use it, but I think, yeah, sometimes it might be useful. Um, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Anyone else have thoughts with that question? Allie, go ahead.
I guess well, it depends where you're working. If you're working, for example, out of an Antarctic research station or any research station, I guess one of the most important things to do is to find out what gear and equipment is available for you to use, for your team to use from that station. Because obviously whatever they don't provide, you need to take yourself. And that's why a packing list is important, such that once you have found out that information, everyone can then be on the same page about what they need to bring because it's been put into a packing list. And in terms of, just a quick comment on safety. I think one of the things I've learned is even if you are out with a mountaineer who's there to help with the safety, ensure the safety of your team, it's still okay to have it's still important that you have veto powers. People should speak up if they feel unsafe. Every team member, because the mountaineer hasn't necessarily seen all the dangers. May not be fully aware of what is going on, or they may not have been out as regularly as the field team have, so may not be aware of the changing conditions. So I think that's really important too. Even if there is someone there specifically in charge of your safety, you can still speak up to them.
Yeah, and Allie, connecting your comment on gear to a previous question related to grant preparation, I think knowing as people transition into PI status that you can write gear that isn't otherwise provided into your grants so that people on your grants don't have to pay for that out of pocket is a way that PIs can make fieldwork more accessible for folks who are new to it.
Yeah, that's really important point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And also there's a lot of people who are willing to share gear such that if particularly students don't have gear, they may be able to borrow it from others. At some point there was actually some sort of shared Google Doc for gear, I think, at least in the polar community, polar fieldwork community. I don't know if that's still ongoing.
Yeah, it is. It was shared through Cryosphere for All. I'll try to find a link and then send it to folks after the panel discussion. Thanks for that. Ryan, go ahead.
First of all, that was a great point, Mariam. That I don't think that gets conveyed enough about how much that we do include these when we're writing grants. So we do include like polar field gear, and for some of us who've been in the field before, we don't necessarily need it because we've already had it. But it's really for the students or for early career who you haven't had those experiences yet. So we want to make sure that those, the critical gear is covered for. But my point was kind of 2 points. One, when you're in the field and you have your gear and you're going into, let's say, a potentially dangerous situation, to make sure that you're taking the time to double and triple check those things. Check your carabiners, check whatever you're doing, your crampons, make sure that those are situated properly. Don't take it for granted and try to rush through it. Definitely take the time to check your gear as much as possible. And then when you do make a plan to go through something, if you encounter that situation, make sure you follow that your plan. I mean, it's easy to say that, and it's somewhat might be obvious, but a case in point, there was an instance this past field season where Allie and I were on snow machines going into a little bit of a dicey area, and before we went in, we said, okay, we're gonna go check this out, and if we see this, that's it, we're gonna back out. And we got to a certain point, we're looking around, and we looked at each other, and we're like, we probably could, I don't know, but we went back and said, no, we said if we had any discussion at all that we were just gonna stop, and we did. And I think I'll toot both our horns and say that we did. We just stopped and said, you know what, we're gonna get the mountaineers out here to double check. So even as PIs, you just want to make sure that you're following the plans you put into place. It's easy to, once you're there, like, we'll be fine. Don't do that. Follow the plans you put in place when you were clearly thinking before you went into that situation.
Thanks. I'll transition us to the next question, which is a short and sweet one, but I think a very good one. And that is, do folks recommend being Wilderness First Aid certified, or WFA or WFR, Wilderness First Responder certified? If anyone has thoughts on that, that'd be great to hear from you all about. Or is anyone here WFA, WFR certified? Go ahead, Maya. Oh, Maya, can you start over? Your audio is cutting out for some reason. Mm-mm.
Any better now?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so I'm not with a certified, so maybe I'm kind of like should be preaching to myself, I guess. But I at least know that the people I've worked with on the boats I've been on have taken that course and then have proceeded to like be the main person in charge of someone in a really dangerous situation. And so it's probably recommended that someone on the team is, because some of that that basic first aid can really, be critical in responding to a scenario. And so if you're going out and you know the field team and you're the person in charge of this field team, it's probably recommended, because I've seen a lot of situations that got real dicey with the first aid course has really, saved some people there.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. Go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, I agree. At least some sort of first aid training. I had CPR training. We had a bunch of Eagle Scouts on our team, so they had first aid training as well. But luckily at our like field camp, there was an EMT, so we were able to like at least make sure everyone knew how to use a sat phone in case we needed to get the EMT out. So I think yeah, kind of depending on what the field station has. But if we didn't have that, I definitely would have wanted at least a few people on our team to be wilderness first aid certified.
I like that point again about redundancy, Amelia, in like making sure you have a plan if you're one trained person, yeah, is the one who needs help. Katria, go ahead.
Yeah, and in addition to yeah, woofer or woofer, I also think um if you have to do like snow machine travel or I don't know, other things like that that you don't have a lot of prior experience in, definitely ask if your PI doesn't already offer your project to cover that sort of training.
Thanks for that, everyone. Go ahead, Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, I've never had a WFA certificate, but I've always, when I've been in the field, had a more basic first aid certificate, maybe American Red Cross or the European equivalent, which is, yeah, more basic. But if, depending on how remote you are in the field, if you have the key skills, particularly CPR, then yeah, I think that's enough and certainly better than nothing because WFA is a long and expensive course, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I'm a personal huge advocate of WUFA and woofer and having at least one person on your team trained in it. Um, in part because I've had to employ my skills like 3 different times in the field and the people I was with didn't have those skills. And I'll say that the different organizations I've gone through, like they do a really good job of having you practice scenarios and using their structures over and over and over again so that when you're in the field and you're like, oh my gosh, someone's just gotten gashed, maybe. Here's that's yeah. You don't have to you like might acknowledge that that's a big deal, but then immediately you might default to the structures they've given you of assessing the risk and then being able to address the risk. So anyway, sorry, went off on one. But next question. We got a question in the chat that is asking if panel members can explain a step-by-step manner in their process of planning research from the grant application stage to logistical planning, timeframe planning, and then how you, like what you do after the season as well when you get back. Is someone or maybe two people willing to walk through your sort of thought process or the steps that you have embarked upon? Ryan, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to read this and think about what I'm going to say. So I think, it's interesting because no matter how far advanced you have in these grant proposal cycles, it feels like you never have enough time, right? And so you do the best that you can when you're writing that. So having said that, what I often do is I will sort of reach out to my collaborators, try to see what we can do, what we think we can accomplish as sort of a broad strokes. And then as I'm sitting down to write the proposal, I'll actually sort of, from a field component perspective, write out those components and where I think we're going to do those to find what we will need to do that and then create a budget and a people who I think can accomplish that and then sort of write the proposal to that. Because for me, that's what works the best is knowing what we can actually accomplish, knowing what we've done before, what our experiences have led us to. And so using that is sort of what I've relied on as far as getting, writing the field plan, like what can we realistically do and not just sort of looking at it more theoretically, like we've done this before, or find examples where we have done this and sort of relate it to this new area or some technique we've done before we're modifying slightly. And so using your past experiences, I think is sort of a big, is sort of a key component. And so for early career, I think, wherever those experiences come from, it doesn't have to be PI experience. It could be as a postdoc or as a grad student if you did some sort of summer field camp. A lot of geoscience programs, as far as I know, do a lot of field camps, at least in the US. And so, relying on some of those prior experiences that you've had and building them in and speaking to those, I think is really important when you're writing these proposals. And then I think I've answered, I don't know, grant application, logistics planning, time frame. Yeah. So kind of maybe starting with what you want to end up with and then working your way backwards to see what you could realistically accomplish, because a big part of the review process will be whether or not you can put the best proposal forward, but if you can't accomplish that in the time frame that's allotted, that can count against you. So making sure you're not biting off more than you can chew.
Thanks, Ryan. Does anyone have thoughts on the very last part of the question, which is what to do when you get back from the field? And is there like a step that's relevant to take? Maybe you're exhausted and you need a bit of a break, but like, how do you conclude and wrap up things? Go ahead, Allie.
So I think, yeah, everyone generally is pretty tired at the end of a field season, so a bit of a break is good. But then once everyone's back and settled and done what they need to do, I think it can be helpful to have some debriefs, both from the science point of view, but also from maybe the kind of team dynamics point of view. And this partly depends on how much of a debrief you had before you left the field. But if you didn't have that much of one, particularly for the team dynamics side, then it can be helpful to regroup and discuss, particularly if you're planning for next field season, another field season in the future, so this is actually what we did as a field team when we got back from our recent field season. We recently had a debrief, partly to prepare for next field season. And that was more on the team dynamic side, but we also have a debrief scheduled to discuss the science aspects of the project. So that's getting everyone together, which in our case is many people, I don't know, 12, 13 people maybe, to discuss where everyone's at with looking at initial field data that we've got and what their plans for analysis and eventually paper writing and presenting at conferences could be, although it's early days.
I also, this is something that I every time wish I had done better. At the end of your day, you're so tired, but forcing yourself to like sit down and just write some notes about what happened that day, what your reflections are on it. And even if it's like a voice note in your phone or like, I have even gotten my partner to like take notes down as I tell him things over the phone. Like it can really you're exhausted by the end of these days. But that, and then also at the very end of the full time you've been there, to really like take some, I think these are the things that can sometimes turn into like the discussion section of a paper. Some reflections on process can be really helpful.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to speak to that before we move on? Okay. I'm going to combine our ask for closing statements from folks, if there's anything else you want to share, with responding to a question that I've gotten from several early career scientists, which is, do you have any recommendations for early career scientists who care a lot about field safety, they care a lot about planning, but are maybe working with a lead who might not value that or value process in the same way, or in a way that means that conversations are facilitated ahead of the field season and whatnot. So you can, share any closing statements, but also if you have any recommendations for folks who are in this kind of tricky power position, that would be really great. A simpler way to phrase that might be like, what can early career scientists do when they're not in a position of power within the field planning process. Maya, go ahead.
Maybe it's not the best advice, but something I do if you see that they are not the person who is supposed to be in charge is not doing things that you think should be like acknowledged, and if you are in a position where you feel comfortable doing so, I would kind of just take it upon myself and be like, hi, I'm actually going to get us all together without them and talk about some of the more logistics, some of the more concerns, especially if they're like an older person, they might not know, especially if they're like a PI that's not in the field with you, they might not know, the real environment there. You take them, like, if you can get everyone's email, get a Zoom call going and be like, hey, so this is actually a little bit more realistically what might happen and how you deal with it and how you work with this, how you work with that. I think just, coming to them as, more of a peer and just being like, hi, just like some advice. We're super excited for everything to happen, but this might be some other additional things you need to be aware of before you go out into this remote environment. I think just do it anyway if you are in a position where you can.
I love that recommendation of peer leadership. Thanks, Maya. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. And I just want to piggyback on that and say, yeah, my first thought was sort of lead by example, right? So if they're not going to do it, then you do it. And sometimes you might get resistance. Sometimes you might impress them and they might be like, oh, you know what? This is a good idea. Maybe I will listen to this. And so be flexible, be adaptable, but lead by example, even if it means you're doing it in parallel to whatever they're doing. But yeah, Maya, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's an excellent point and one that probably doesn't get stressed enough.
Go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think maybe oftentimes like some of the pushback can be because PIs maybe already feel like they're doing a lot and it would be so much more work to like kind of get the field or safety stuff like taken care of as well. So I think maybe volunteering to be the person who like sets up the bear safety training or whatever, helicopter safety training, things like that. I think taking a leadership role in that and kind of taking that off the plate of someone who like it might be too much work for them to also, or they might consider it, I don't know, not as necessary. You never know. But yeah, I think just being willing to volunteer for that would be helpful.
Thanks. Go ahead, Katria.
I think sometimes a way to make it less awkward if you feel like you're stepping on toes or something is hopefully your university or department has some like forms that you're required to fill out about field safety, and you can kind of say, even if you can kind of use that as a starting point, saying like I really want to make sure that we have to fill this out, this boring paperwork, but actually it's a way to make sure your whole team's on board, and having the necessary trainings and communication ahead of time. And I also think like speaking with other either early career folks in your team or even on other teams can be really helpful. Or if there's a postdoc who's kind of an intermediary, maybe they feel more comfortable bringing something up if you don't yourself feel comfortable.
Thanks for that, everyone. Any other?
I agree with everything that has been said. They've all been really great suggestions, great answers to a great question, honestly, Mariam. So thank you. I particularly liked Amelia's suggestion of the more early career person, offering to take leadership of the field safety aspect. As a person who's often been in the leadership role with fieldwork, speaking about myself, any time that someone in the team says, hey, I can do this, I can take the lead, and I'm very happy for that to happen because I normally am very busy with many other things. So I really like that idea. And that could help with potential resistance if there is some with that person.
Thank you all so, so much. I feel like I've learned so much, and it was so wonderful to be able to bring together panelists from various contexts and with a lot of experience. Yeah, huge round of applause to our panelists and a thank you. We hope everyone here has found this panel discussion useful, and we encourage you to attend future PSECCO events if they're of interest to you. For example, we have a climate mental health webinar in April, and we'll be doing something related to how to engage with international polar policy spaces in May. So definitely take a look at the events page of the PSECCO website if you're interested in that. And if for those of you who aren't aware, we also want to highlight the Polar Early Career World Summit Synthesis Report, which pulls together early career priorities for long-term research planning. And there's a call out, there's one line at least in the report that calls for making fieldwork more accessible. So if you're interested in reading that and possibly endorsing it, Madison's pasted a link in the chat to that. And we'd love for you to engage. This helps inform processes like the upcoming International Polar Year and the associated priorities for it. You can also stay up to date on PSECCO and community events by subscribing to our newsletter or joining the PSECCO community Slack. That could be a good place also to connect with other early career researchers if you don't have a network of your own regarding fieldwork or best practices, examples of codes of conduct, etc. So you can join that via, you can join the Slack via the post Madison just made in the chat. And finally, we'd love your feedback. It's very, very helpful to the PSECCO team to learn how we could make events better, learn what you liked about the events that you attend. So if you could fill out this survey, that would be really helpful. And thank you again to our panelists. It was so lovely to learn from you, and to everyone who attended today's panel. And we hope you have a really good rest of your day. Thank you.